In sales, we talk a lot about performance, tools, processes, but we rarely stop to ask ourselves whether we are lowering the standard of what we consider really acceptable. And when a standard drops, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly. So it becomes normal, then it becomes okay, then it becomes the bare minimum, which becomes the new standard. And that's exactly where today's conversation with David Brock begins, because good enough rarely looks like failure, but it's often what kills performance over time. Welcome back, Dave.
Well, it's always such a pleasure to be on this podcast with you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Tobia.
Thank you indeed for, being back. So let's go straight to your new book, Dave, because I think there are a lot of things to say. But before that, you know, good thing is that my audience is growing. So if you want to introduce a little bit yourself, maybe someone of them still have to, get to know you better.
Okay, thanks, Toby. I'm Dave Brock. I'm author of Now Is Good Enough, Good Enough, Mindsets and Behaviors for Sales Excellence. My first book was Sales Manager's Survival Guide. And I'll tell you later, but the next book is coming out in March, which is the follow-on to Is Good Enough, Good Enough. So we'll have three books. I run a boutique consulting company called Partners in Excellence, and there are about 15 of us scattered around the world. And we primarily consult with very, very large organizations, and primarily in the tech sector, industrial products, and professional services.
Thank you, Dave. And first question, why this book and why now?
Well, if you've been, I know you follow my blog posts, but if you've been following my blog posts over the last few years, you've noticed kind of a huge amount of frustration in my writing, because I see so many organizations settling for mediocrity, and they don't necessarily recognize mediocrity, that they are doing that. But you see data points like today in the tech sector, in particularly, win rates of 15 to 20% are the standard. And I remember when I used to say I'd fire anybody who had a win rate less than 30%. And if you had a win rate of 30%, you're on a performance improvement plan. But we've accepted that. We have fewer than 35% of reps making quota, and we consider that acceptable. We have huge amounts of turnover and attrition at leadership levels and at individual contributor levels. And so all of that is contributing to some things that say we may be hitting our goals, but we're not performing to our full potential. And the example I use all the time is if we're hitting our goals with win rates of 15%, that means we're squandering, we're competing to lose 85% of our deals. And so I say, if you just change your mindset a little bit, and if you went from 15%, because the math is easy, you go to 30%, guess what? You double your revenue. You're still spending the time on it. You're still committing the resources and so on. So I see people settling, and one of the most deceptive things is we make our goals, but we don't realize we could be doing so much better. And whether it's organizationally, we can drive huge increases in revenue, or whether it's personally, we can drive huge increases in our personal achievement, in our growth and development. So that kind of pent up frustration drove me to write the book.
You know how I am, Dave. I just have to ask another follow-up question. Do you remember the exact time when your frustration was at its peak? Like when you said, okay, this is enough. Like when have you seen exactly in time mediocrity becoming the standard?
So maybe if you charted it, I've been at peak frustration for several years. and again, you see me writing about it and whining and complaining about it in various different forms in my blog and that kind of thing. And I just kind of, earlier this year, I just kind of had to think about how do I package all this together in an interesting way that catches people's attention. And I was thinking about the book and all that. And I don't know if we haven't talked about how I wrote the book, but I actually co-authored it with Claude. And what I did is I went to Claude. I said, I wanted to talk about this topic. I have so much on my mind. And I literally, I had 4,000 articles that I put into Claude, and help me design something that I could talk about this topic. And we went back and forth and designed the book. And then it helped crystallize everything for me. I saw bits and pieces. I could see things like the lack of discipline or the lack of accountability or the lack of curiosity. But I struggled to, how do you put all these things together? And it was in kind of my exchanges with Claude that caused me to really start figuring out how to put everything together. So that was it, and the writing process was actually very, very quick. And one thing, just to tantalize your audience, is the initial outline ended up being about 700 pages. And so what I did is I just cut the book in half. I focused this book on mindsets and behaviors, and in late February, March, you'll see the next book that kind of pulls it back into our traditional sales world. It pulls it back to, how do I incorporate these mindsets and behaviors into our training? How do I incorporate these mindsets and behaviors into our tools and processes? How do I incorporate it into our coaching and things like that? So it's where I have two different parts of the puzzle. I start pulling them together in the next book.
So it's 10 years of frustration, pretty much 10, 15 years of frustration, all in a book. No, but I shared already this with you, and the idea of having Claude and stating that Claude was your co-author was brilliant for me, because it's pretty much what everyone is doing, but is not saying.
Yeah.
So have you ever thought that these thing could have, I don't know, made you lose readers, or could have had a counter effect on, let's say, the spread of your book?
Well, it's interesting because I sent a draft of the book to a number of people, including you, and the key question I asked is, am I selling out? And the response that came back is, it says, you're the first one being transparent about your use of Claude. Most people are you can immediately read, you can look at something. I was looking at something, a white paper somebody sent me yesterday, and I could clearly see that none of some of this person's ideas were in there, but it wasn't this person's voice. It was a completely different voice. And also, so one is, I wanted to be transparent to say, these are very powerful tools. I couldn't have come up with this book without the help of Claude. But the words and the thoughts are all mine, and that kind of thing. But it really helped me structure my thinking, and I truly used it as a debate partner. And I think if we're using it as that, if we're using it to help us write and help us deliver the ideas better, and we're being perfectly transparent with it, we shouldn't be embarrassed about saying we're using these tools, because people will see how powerfully we're using these tools, and that kind of thing. And that's where we get the real benefit out of AI, is less so in doing the work for me, but more in helping us think differently, and being, in this case, Claude was my debate partner. It would say, Dave, this chapter doesn't make any sense. You've departed from these ideas. And it would really come back and tell me this. And I'd say, well, what's wrong? And it would tell me this. And I'd say, well, if I made these changes, and that kind of thing. So it really, these are such powerful tools if we use them the right way.
What was the biggest challenge to work with Claude as a co-author?
Actually, there weren't many challenges in working with it. At first, the first was I had a certain level of subscription to Claude, and I was doing so much, I kept running out of tokens. So it would say, Dave, you know, you have to stop now, come back in 3 hours. And we can do that. So what I did is I just said, the hell with that. And I upgraded my subscription so we can go on and on and on for days and days and days without having that. That was the biggest, and it was just a kind of a temporary setback. But no, it was, again, very powerful because particularly both Claude and Gemini come back to you with thoughtful critiques and thoughtful ideas. And they say things like, this is really where you're on target. You're missing this idea, perhaps. Would it be interesting to include it? And you're not communicating as effectively as you might on these ideas. So it really helped me go through. Just like I use other people to critique my writing, I was using Claude to help me with this writing.
Makes sense. And but now let's go straight to the book, because there are a few topics I would like to talk about with you. And the first one, I mean, my favorite ones. So let's be honest. I think that one of the strongest themes of the book is really personal accountability, which only a few of sales consultants, sales trainers in general talk about. So no excuses, just results. So my question for you is, why is accountability so uncomfortable in sales organizations today? And how does the good enough mindset make it easier to externalize responsibility rather than owning the outcomes of our actions?
So I think part of the answer to that is people are afraid to be accountable, to own up to maybe they've made a mistake or could have done something better, because to some degree we've created almost a punishment kind of mindset within organizations. Is if you've made a mistake, you're at fault. You're either put on a performance improvement plan or you're fired or something like that. Is we don't tolerate mistakes very well. So people are afraid to be accountable, even though they may want to be, because their management or their leadership has this kind of blame kind of psychology to them. So we've created this dysfunction in organizations. I think perhaps not consciously, but we've created a fear about being honest and accountable because of what might happen to us, or even just things like socially how we're impacted within the organization. Is maybe I lose this big deal, and I own up to it. I said I didn't do the right things, and all my peers are going to start looking at me and say, Dave's really a jerk. Which is true, but Dave's really not very good, and so we kind of socially become outcasts. Management says, you lost that big deal, and they blame me for losing that big deal. So we kind of create this culture where I think through fear of what happens when we're honest and accountable is drives us. What happens in organizations where accountability is really high is they don't look to assign blame. They look to understand what happened and what we need to do. So it's this thing, it's the difference between organizations that assign blame versus organizations that recognize we make mistakes, we do things that may not have been as great as possible, but we own up to it, and now we learn from it and say, how do we improve and grow?
Makes sense. But another angle here, because I see that in a lot of sales orgs, it feels like personal accountability has been taken away. Okay. Has been kind of replaced by micromanagement. So even organizations that were open to mistakes, now they put together, especially in SaaS, honestly,
Yeah.
they put together these massive stack of micromanagement and KPIs and numbers. And it seems that as salespeople, we are more accountable for actions and activities than outcomes. How
Yeah.
can both the seller and the manager rebuild real personal accountability in this environment? And what does it look in practice?
Yeah, so I think what you say is right now we have started getting into that micromanagement kind of thing. Part of it is an absence of trust. If we don't trust our people, if we don't trust our leaders, if we don't trust each other, then we can't build that sense of accountability. And also, because we don't trust our people to do things the way we want them to do them, we micromanage them. Because we don't trust them to do things the way we want them to do them, we give them these scripts and say, stay to this script, don't deviate from it. But then when you start looking at it and you look at the failure rates, you look at win rates and things like that, you have to say something's not working here. And you start saying is we cannot script every single situation perfectly. We cannot micromanage every single situation personally. So we have to trust our people to be able to adapt and change. And that's where some of the other things like curiosity, customer centricity, and ability to adapt and change come into this thing, is to say we have to trust that they can figure out how to do the right things. At the same time, we have to provide them the training, the support, the tools to help them figure that out and be able to do that. And then again, I think this foundation of trust is so important there.
And talking about this trust, because I think that it's also connected to your book, do you think that this low level of trust is somewhat related to the high turnover in the software industry?
Yeah. I think the low level of trust. You see all the data comes out of employee engagement keeps reaching low. Just when you think you've reached bottom, we find a new bottom. So, you look at this thing of I think trust isn't there within the organizations, trust between leaders, trust among the sales team, and so on and so forth, and trust with our customers. Our customers don't trust us. And so you have all this thing interplay. And so what it does is it drives us to mediocrity. It drives us to, in that world, what can we accept? We accept lower levels of performance, and that kind of thing. So I think that's a foundational kind of thing. I look at some of the companies we work with that are very high performers, consistently high performers. It's interesting. One of the key questions I ask when somebody's asking me to be on help them on a project or something, is I say, tell me about average tenure in your organization. And most of the high performers that I work with have tenures of 7, 10, 15 years. People who've been around for a long time, people who have deep knowledge and deep experience. And inherent in that is an organization where there's deep trust across the organization. In these other organizations where you see tenures of 11 to 18 months, it's constant turnover, and a lot of it's driven by lack of trust. Salespeople say managers don't care about me; all they care about is the numbers. And managers say, I don't know how to make my, and so there's all this turnover. And what we don't recognize is the millions and millions of dollars in lost opportunity this creates for us. I look at an organization with 11 to 18 months tenure, and you just run the math. Say selling technology products and it's medium complex. Well, it probably takes you 6 to 9 months to get onboarded. It probably takes you maybe 6 months to start developing a pipeline. And your sales cycle is probably 9 to 18 months. And so you start running the math and you start saying, if you're only there 11 months, or even if you're there 18 months, the math doesn't work. Or you look at a leader and you say, if a leader comes in, it takes them some time to understand the problem, some time to understand what the change initiative is. And then putting the change initiative in place, even in a smaller organization, takes time, and they run out of time. So you see all these wasted efforts and all I think underpinned by a lack of trust, a lack of accountability, a lack of discipline in doing what we do. Things in discipline. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, a brand new client, and I was going through some of the data that they had, and I asked them. They opened up Salesforce, and we went through it, and I said, "Your people aren't using Salesforce, and why aren't they?" And there's just a lack of discipline. They didn't understand why they should be using Salesforce. And then two, there's a huge lack of discipline there around doing it. And that was adversely impacting their performance. So those kinds of things.
By reading your book since the first draft you sent me, and by the way, thank you for, putting my name in the acknowledgements at the end. So,
well, you're very important in my writing of this book. So
thank you so much. Anyway, by reading it, the first thought I had was good enough and excellence are a choice.
Mm-hmm.
What I found really, really interesting in the book is how much emphasis you put on discipline to achieve, the excellence, not as a simple motivation, not as a boost of something that goes away 2 days later. And the other thing I liked was that it doesn't stay at the mindset level. So you actually turn something that is difficult to code into an action plan. So the question is, when you talk about creating your excellence action plan, what does that look like in practice?
Well, first in the book, there's some tools to do that. And then I have some AI tools that anybody reading the book can access, and it'll help you develop your personal action plan. But I think just stepping back from that is to, if I look at it, and I'll go through a couple things real quickly. I talk about mindsets. I talk about behaviors. Mindsets by themselves don't change anything. The mindsets, the behavior is the implementation and execution of the mindset. So what I really look at is, do you have the behaviors around discipline? Do you have the behaviors around accountability? Can I see you demonstrating that every day? So that's the first thing. Two is discipline is so important. And it's the little things that count. And we tend not to do the little things. And so, I see people doing the things that they love to do, that gives them great energy and that kind of thing. But if they aren't doing all the little things underneath that make those big things happen, those big things will never happen. Or if they only just focus on the little things, there's these gaps in what they're doing that never allow them to achieve what their goal is. So discipline is the commitment to say, I'm going to do the work. Even if it's boring, tedious work, I have to do the work because that's part of what I need to do to achieve my goals and to achieve my full potential. So if it means getting up every morning and updating CRM, it means I update CRM. If it means, doing these kinds of things, I have to do those things. And then, I have these great calls, I have these great meetings and those kinds of things. But if I didn't do all that other stuff, I wouldn't be able to achieve this potential. So discipline, I think, is the core. And you see, there are a lot of books that are much, much better than this things like Atomic Habits and those kinds of things that talk about how do you start with these little disciplines and do those things. And I really encourage, because those are very helpful kinds of things. But if we don't have that discipline, we have intention without a plan to achieve what those intentions are.
Makes sense. And other than these, attention to little things, what
Mm-hmm.
other non-negotiables you could suggest, sorry, to achieve excellence?
Well, I think so. Excellence is not a destination, it's a path. Um, what level of excellence we achieve may be very different than anybody else's because we have different aspirations. I was in a conversation with somebody yesterday that said, you know, we looked at some of the individuals on their team, and their team, they were really doing great things and they were on the path to achieving their they were on the path to achieving excellence for them. It was different than other people. So we each have, we're each on a path to achieve excellence. It continues. It never ends. There's not a goalpost that I go to say, aha, I've conquered it. And also, so that's something. So I think maintaining that kind of continual improvement, continual learning, and so on. The non-negotiables, I think, is, I outlined the behaviors in all that we do to achieve it. I think if I were to advise somebody in starting down this journey, is to look at the book and choose one area. Choose one thing that you focus on. For instance, I'm coaching a CRO for a small tech company, and we were talking about the book, and he says, "I'm really excited. Where do I start?" And I said, "Where do you think you want to start?" And he said, "I'm not curious enough." And so he said, "I'm going to start focusing on my curiosity." And he says, "This is what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way I do reviews with my people." He says, "I tell them too much. I don't ask them enough questions. I don't learn enough about them." So he's changing that. And the remarkable thing is, if he starts out at curiosity, then he'll start automatically getting into accountability, into discipline, into understanding change. And also these things, wherever you start, they're all tied together. And so I think, some people say, "How do I do all these things at once?" I said, just choose one. It may be discipline. How do I start looking at my goals for the week, my schedule for the week, and how do I stick to it? We tend to be in a react respond mode. So I see so many people, they show me their calendars, they're blocked out and color coded. This is prospecting time, this is research time, this is all this sort of stuff. And at the end of the week, you see it's totally destroyed because they got a phone call in their prospecting time from a customer, and they stopped everything and worked on that rather than continuing their prospecting time. So, discipline might be a great place to start and say, what do I need to accomplish this week? How do I block something as simple as block my time, and how do I stick to it?
This CRO is an interesting, link to the next question, because you train, support, consult companies and salespeople, CROs, and so on. In your experience, what is something that people agree with in their pursuit of excellence? They agree with, but never execute in practice.
Um, I think when you look at it, it's hard to disagree with these things and all because they're somewhat abstract. I think where people struggle is, how do I put it in action? How do I make it happen? How do I have the discipline and the accountability to make it happen? And I think the other thing is life intrudes. And everything, whether it's stuff that's happening in business, whether it's stuff that's happening outside of business, it intrudes and we forget. And it's kind of that react respond mechanism. Is we have the best, people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm choosing mediocrity. That's my path. We don't wake up in the morning wanting to do that, but we let it happen to us. And it's kind of this react respond mode as we have the best of intentions, but when it starts in the morning at whatever time in the morning you start, and all of a sudden you get that unexpected phone call or unexpected email, or somebody comes to you with an idea and it diverts you to something else. Or, I kind of look at how many screens do I have open right now? Is that diverting me from what I'm trying to accomplish right now? So it's kind of this stuff is, how do we deal with life intruding and still maintain that discipline?
Protect your focus, as you say.
Protect your focus. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talking about accountability and disciplines, there is another layer. In a specific chapter of the book, Why We Choose to Fail, you talk about these people who get stuck, at good enough, okay? And you uncovered already the reason behind that, but I don't know, is it because they don't know what excellence looks like and what can unlock, or because it's too demanding, too uncomfortable, or too risky to pursue? What are the reasons why, people always get stuck to good enough and good enough becomes the standard?
I think all those factors come into play. The big thing that I see is, if I work with a company that's troubled, they're missing their goals, they're missing their revenue targets, things are broken, they clearly recognize the need to change and that they have to do something about it. The companies that I see most struggling are the companies that are making their goals. And they're making their goals, so they think they're doing well. And even you look at kind of the SaaS companies that say, I'm scaling, I've grown 100% year over year and all that kind of thing, and I'm meeting my goals. But when you do the analysis, you start saying something's wrong here. Again, a SaaS company with a 15 to 20% win rate that's meeting their goals says you're wasting 80 to 85% of your opportunity. So there's something much further than that you can do. And why aren't you interested in doing that? Is I tell people, I am greedy. I want to grow and create as much revenue as I possibly can. And, if I'm already investing the time and resources on that 80 to 85%, and I'm investing it to lose, something's wrong. And so you start looking at people and you start saying, look, you're investing 80 to 85% of your time in losing. Don't you want to change that? And see, again, I think success is, in some cases, success is the problem because it blinds us to the opportunity that we could do better.
Got it. And let's mix a little bit the book conversation with a few comments that I've seen online. While sharing your book, I think that especially one interesting comment came up by Richard Spanier.
Yeah.
Hi, Richard. I know you're listening to this. And
well, Richard always comes up with challenging questions for me. So yes.
Anyway, he said that. Let me read the whole comment. I think it's easier also for the audience to understand. And he said that this idea of operating at good enough to get by level feels almost entrenched for many people, okay? And he was genuinely asking, where do sales professionals actually get to see excellence in action? and learn what it looks like. Is it
Mm-hmm.
the company, the manager, the coaching, the training? Do they need better tools? Do they stop at the surface and don't have the real, skills or capabilities to dive deep into this? So, what is your answer? That we both promised an answer to Richard.
I don't know that there's a single answer. And again, is like when I look at a new client that wants me to work with them, what I really do is I kind of look at who they are and who what they want to be. I ask them things like tenure because that tells me that they build trust, that they're interested in their people and they're interested in growing, and they create a work environment where people want to work there and grow and thrive. I look at things like their culture and their purpose and say, what actions do I see that says they're living up to these things? Not necessarily that they're achieving all these things, but their intent is to do that. And you see actions that help them do that, and those kinds of things. And I think if I were a salesperson looking for a job and those things were important to me, is I would look for companies that had those things. The example I give often is when I started my sales career, I started with IBM. And IBM at the time had a very tough culture. It was very high expectations. It was we called it a conflict management culture because we came in, it was kind of very tough. We'd come into meetings and have ideas, and I'd say, Tobia, you're just absolutely wrong. You don't get it. And you'd say, Dave, you're you're an old guy. You don't get it. And we'd go back and forth. But at the end, we weren't arguing at each other. We were arguing for the best ideas. And so it was a very tough environment. Lots of people couldn't fit into that conflict-oriented environment. And so they chose to leave and go someplace else. It was an environment that happened to fit me very well, and I thrived and I grew quite a bit. So I think as sellers, as individual contributors, we aren't going to thrive in an organization that has different values, different purpose, different culture than what we want. And so we should seek as best we can. It'll never be perfect, but it's kind of like Venn diagrams. You don't want to be like this. You want to be kind of more like this. And then you have the chance to thrive.
So it should be something that starts from understanding ourselves and then looking for a company that has these criteria.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too often we don't take the time when we're looking for a new job, we don't take the time to say, what is it that I'm really looking for? It's, we're so focused on, what comp plan can I get versus what is it that I'm really looking for? We won't achieve our comp plan unless we're really aligned and fascinated in the organization we're in. And also, if they promise you wonderful comp, but you say, this is just a terrible organization to work for, you'll never achieve that plan. But if you go to say, this is an organization that I'm excited about the people, it really aligns with whatever my culture and values and purpose is, then you'll thrive there. And we all have different kind of values and purpose. And also it's and none of them are right or wrong, but it's just finding the organization where you fit best.
Another layer here, and thanks for your answer, because he added something even more interesting. So he asked if you're really hiring in sales to fill seats rather than selecting and developing for excellence. And if the work that becomes, tedious time by time, and if because of that, as a consequence, we end up lowering the bar without realizing it and really missing, the forest for the tree. So where do you think the real leverage is in this situation? Is it hiring, coaching environment? Is it a system, tools, assessment, something else entirely?
I think it's yes to all of the above. And you have to kind of realize the underpinnings are like when I talk to people about their hiring, and I say, well, tell me what's the competency model that you're looking for in that hiring, and they talk about, well, here are the experiences, here are the skills, and so on. We want them very experienced in this kind of selling skills. We want them experienced maybe in these kinds of products, these kinds of markets, and they focus on these kinds of things. And I say, what are you looking for competencies and behaviors? And they say, what do you mean? And I said, the skills and all that kind of thing are very easy to develop, but if you don't have the right behaviors, if you don't have the right alignment, they will never perform. So, if you're hiring to fill seats, the probability is that you're going to hire the wrong person. They could be a wonderful salesperson, but they're a wrong fit from a cultural and a behavioral point of view. And so you're hiring the wrong person and you'll fail. And also, so that's why we can't be looking at filling seats. We have to look at, are the people we're bringing into the organization aligned with our purpose, our goals, our culture about the way we work, that we hold people accountable, that we are customer centric, that we are disciplined and those kinds of things. And if we don't inspect for that when we're hiring, we make a mistake. Then if we don't continue to develop that in our people, because, there is no end to curiosity. How do I continue to work myself and say, how can I become more curious? How can I become better in developing my curiosity skills? Or how can I become better in customer centricity and that kind of thing? So it's a continued journey. So you have to, one, start with the right people, then two, continue to develop them yourself. And then three, if leaders aren't modeling these behaviors, then why should your people do these kinds of things? So it's all very tightly interrelated.
Thank you, David. I think that we're almost there with this, pleasant conversation. I just have one question, two questions actually. The first one is, let's go back to what you said at the beginning. What are the next steps? What are you focusing on? When is the new book coming out?
Okay, so what I'm doing, and the idea is I'm calling it the double helix for sales excellence. And what we've always focused on before is what I call the mechanisms, because they're easy to understand and easy to do. I can put in place a training program. I can put in place CRM and some tools. I can put in place a sales process. I put in place metrics and goals. I can bring in AI to help us with these things. So we have all these things around mechanisms. And we've been using those for years and years, decades and decades. And what we're seeing is, even though we have all those right mechanisms, they're not working to their full extent. I'm working with a client right now. I mentioned it earlier, is when I look at CRM compliance, it's probably about 15%. And they're not getting the value out of the CRM that they should. But we focus on that. What I did is I wrote this book on mindsets and behaviors. If I have the right mindsets and behaviors, I can be very good, but I can't be as good as I could be without these mechanisms. And so what I'm saying is, how do we integrate these mechanisms to kind of amplify each other? So if I look at, I'm doing sales training, how do I integrate curiosity and accountability into my training program? How do I how do I not just train them in, let me say, Challenger as an example? How do I not just train them in how to do Challenger, but how do I train them in how to implement and improve their curiosity through the Challenger process? How do I train them how to improve their accountability as they develop their deal strategies through Challenger, through this process? So what we're trying to do is say, how do we take each of these not as standalones, but as intertwined? And in that kind of thing, what you do is you take 1 plus 1, but when you put them together, you get 5.
Got it. And one last question, maybe one last thought, okay? If you had to leave the audience with just one sentence, okay? Something they could act on tomorrow, that would you say to help them, what would you say to help them move away from good enough and close to excellence?
So well, first buy the book so that you can buy the book and leave a 5-star review on Amazon. But once you've done that, I take the Nike thing. Just do it. Choose one place. Whatever's most important to you right now, whether it's that discipline, how to get control over my week and actually accomplish something, or it might be how do I become more customer centric? How do I become better at understanding my customer? How do I become more curious? Or even things like it's a little bit more difficult. What's my purpose? I mentioned in the book, one of the magical things about the book is I had in our organization had lost its purpose. And from the outside, it didn't, because we're one of the highest performing consulting organizations in the world for a small boutique organization. And we make, millions of dollars, and we have very important impact on our clients. But we sat down and started saying, we can do more. There's so much more. And what we've done is part of it is AI has transformed our business and what we can do. So we have upped our performance from what from the outside world was a very high performance, but we said we were settling for good enough. We said now we can use these things and up our performance and up our clients' performance. And so it's that kind of thing is for me, I've always been pretty good at curiosity, customer centricity, and those kinds of things. But that purpose I kind of lost. And so I've really focused on purpose and what it means to the business, and it ripples through all the other capabilities. So it's like Nike, just choose one place, start there, and you'll find that it ripples through all the other things. That was a very long sentence.
Oh, that was a good sentence. I mean, as soon as, didn't have any comma or stuff like this, it was just one sentence. Anyway, David, thank you so much for, being here, for coming back on the show. I'm always happy to have you as a guest. And bye, but get ready because you will be here again when your next book is out.
Well, I hope I'm here and not here on the podcast, but I love our conversations and I learned so much. As I said, you were one of the models when I wrote this book. So I thank you for inviting me on this, and I continue to look at the behaviors you model, and I write blog posts about it, though I don't mention your name and things like that.
Thank you again, Dave.
Take care.